You're listening to HackerNews.fm, the unofficial, fast-paced rundown of the hottest stories from Hacker News for December 10th, 2025. Today, we've got AI hallucinating the future, governments locking down teen social media, and a brutal new benchmark showing how badly top LLMs struggle at real mental health care.
Plus, yes, the internet is losing its mind over a full-on font coup in government docs. If you enjoy these quick dives, hit like, subscribe, drop a comment, or share HackerNews.fm with a friend.
Let's jump in with our first story. Show HN. Gemini Pro 3 hallucinates the HN front page 10 years from today. Next up is Show HN. Gemini Pro 3 imagines the HN front page 10 years from now. Still number one, and now over 3,200 points. We covered it yesterday, but it's just stubbornly parked on top.
Yeah, the author basically asked Gemini, a text-generating AI, to spit out a Hacker News front page from 2035, riffing on Fusion, Rust kernels, AR glasses, and, of course, Office 365 price hikes. In the comments, it's either greatest LLM creation I've ever seen, or people grumbling that it's basically the world's most expensive lorem ipsum machine. And both of those feel true.
Next up is a big one. Australia's social media ban takes effect in world first. This one hit number 2 on Hacker News with, 693 points and around 1,000 comments?
Yeah, so this is the law that makes Australia the first country to just flat out ban social media for under 16s. And it orders 10 big platforms, TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, the usual suspects, to block kids or face fines up to about $49.5 million.
Reuters has the Prime Minister calling it a proud day for families, and one of the biggest social and cultural changes the country's seen, all framed around protecting kids from online harms, and what some HN commenters call predatory algorithms.
On Hacker News, the top comment is actually pretty sympathetic. One person says the ban doesn't have to be watertight, technically, because social media runs on network effects. Knock the percentage of kids down far enough, and the peer pressure to join kind of collapses.
Right, and that same commenter is actually more worried about side effects, normalizing constant ID uploads that scammers can exploit, and a small fraction of kids drifting into fringe networks that are off the radar, and maybe a lot darker.
Then you get the privacy camp. One HN user says, "We're literally at the point where we have know your customer laws just to post on the internet, like bank-style ID checks glued onto basic speech."
Supporters push back and say, look, we already restrict kids from alcohol, from driving. Nobody's outraged about carding at the liquor store. This is just a digital age limit. And one parent in the thread says it's way easier to say no to your kid when the law backs you up.
But another commenter points out there's a big difference between you can't market X to kids and forcing every user to prove they're not a kid. They compare it to demanding full background checks on all customers, just in case one of them is a terrorist.
And the slippery slope folks are concerned about every form of speech eventually tied to your real-world identity in some giant, probably leaky database.
Someone even notes that in Australia, clubs already scan and store your ID at the door. So in a way, the surveillance slope isn't hypothetical. It's just extending from your nightlife to your entire online life.
And then there's the "this just backfires" angle. One comment says, "The government isn't helping you. They just pushed every child in Australia to unmoderated and decentralized social networks. Complete free-for-alls like 4chan, Mastodon, Blue Sky, PeerTube."
Others are more fatalistic. They say regulation can crush an industry, and social media has become so corrosive for teens that a ban is unlikely to be worse, even if it drives some traffic out to those fringes.
I like thinking of this as a live experiment. It's not going to be perfect. Kids will find VPNs and workarounds, but the whole world is watching to see whether mental health benefits really outweigh the privacy and speech costs.
Yeah, and that HN thread really nails the tension. How much surveillance are we willing to bake into the internet to protect kids from the worst parts of the internet? There aren't easy answers here, just trade-offs we're finally being forced to confront.
Next up is new benchmark shows top LLMs struggle in real mental health care, which actually hit number 1 on Hacker News, around 105 points and nearly 150 comments. So, yeah, this one stirred people up.
Yeah, and the piece is from Sword Health, announcing Mind Eval, their new framework for testing how good large language models really are at doing mental health style conversations.
The core idea is pretty neat. They simulate an entire therapy session with 3 AIs. One plays the patient, one is the clinician model you're actually testing, and then a separate judge model scores the transcript on things like clinical accuracy, ethics, and the quality of the therapeutic relationship.
And this isn't just a one-shot Q&A, it's multi-turn, like 20 to 40 back and forths. So it starts to look a lot more like a real therapy session. The punchline is, across 12 frontier models, average scores stayed under 4 on a 1 to 6 scale, and dropped further with more severe cases and longer sessions. And bigger models didn't consistently do better.
They also open-sourced everything, prompts, code, the human validation data, and made this point that we need to move beyond vibes to rigorous, clinically grounded evaluation, which, honestly, feels pretty fair.
On Hacker News, the author, Ricardo Rey, jumps into the comments and explains that they first showed you can simulate patients with an LLM, then that an LLM judge correlates medium-high with real clinicians, and only after that did they run the big benchmarks.
Commenters were still pretty skeptical, though. One person basically said, "This result seems meaningless without a human clinician control," and pushed hard on, like, what does a 4 out of 6 actually mean? Is that already good enough, or is it more like barely passing?
Ricardo's answer was basically, we're not claiming humans are better or worse on this particular scale, just that these scores are medium-low, there's obvious room to improve, and we can't improve what we can't measure. So it's more about building a ruler than declaring victory.
Another big thread went after the whole self-play setup, LLM as patient and LLM as judge, and compared it to students grading each other's math homework. Which, yeah, could drift off into its own weird little universe if you're not careful.
And then the conversation zooms out. People start citing chatbot-linked suicides and saying this is self-evidently a terrible idea. Others push back that humans also screw up therapy, and access is so bad that, for some folks, an AI assistant might still be better than nothing.
I liked the counseling grad commenter and others in that thread who said basically, therapy isn't going to be replaced. People still want a human in the room. But I'd love LLMs as a cheap supplement or off-hours option because the current system just doesn't scale. That felt very grounded.
And the human editor jumped in to point out something really important here. Companies like Anthropic have shown through their Clio studies that people are already using LLM chatbots to help them in affective or emotional conversations. So this isn't hypothetical. It's happening right now.
Right, which makes having a benchmark like this even more critical.
Exactly. Whether or not you ever want to call an LLM a therapist, they're already talking to distressed people. Having an open benchmark that at least tells us how badly they can fail feels like a necessary, if uncomfortable, step.
Next up is a story called Why AGI Will Not Happen, which got about 44 points and 49 comments before it just mysteriously got flagged off the front page.
Yeah, our human editor said he saw it trending, thought it was in the top 10, hits refresh, and poof, gone. Which is wild because Tim Detmers is an assistant professor at CMU and a research scientist at the Allen Institute for AI, not some random doom poster.
The piece is basically, okay, everybody, calm down, computation is physical. He argues that linear progress in AI needs exponential resources. GPUs are basically tapped out, and that AGI and superintelligence, at least the way they're usually pitched, kind of ignore those limits.
And he gets very concrete about it. Larger caches are physically farther away on the chip, so moving data is the bottleneck, not doing math. He even claims transformers are close to physically optimal, so you don't get magical gains just because you invented a cute new architecture.
I liked his robotics angle too. We already have dark factories. He points out that problems like stitching sleeves to a t-shirt are unsolved, but often not economically worth throwing a general-purpose robot at. One commenter riffed on that with this analogy that the West is waiting for an AGI supercar instead of just paving roads for ordinary cars.
The comments themselves are pretty split. One person says this is like writing in the 1800s. Going to the moon will not happen. Another calls the imminent AGI/superintelligence crowd a growing AI cult, driven by greed and hope.
Others push back that never is doing a lot of work here. There's a thread saying, look, human-level intelligence is clearly physically possible because, well, humans do it and we're physical. And GPUs haven't actually stopped improving, and maybe we just need better algorithms, not new physics.
Someone nicely summarized the post's claims. GPUs maxing out, scaling laws hitting a wall, robotics being required for true AGI. And then argued the real issue is that current LLMs are missing key ingredients like incremental learning, not that AGI is fundamentally impossible.
And then you get the definitional wars. One commenter, AGI will never happen for one simple and obvious reason. There will never be a consensus about what AGI is. Another counters that this vagueness just lets big labs declare victory and move the goalposts whenever they feel like it.
Whether you buy Detmer's never or not, I think the value here is that it forces people to price in physics and economics instead of just vibes. If nothing else, it's a good antidote to both the hype and the hysteria.
Next up is Size of Life, an interactive from Neil.fun, and this thing just rocketed to #1 on Hacker News with 1,759 points.
Yeah, it's this smooth little scroll from DNA all the way up to this vast forest-like creature, which is a single 100-acre organism in Utah. And our human editor just called it elegant, like absolutely worth 2 minutes of your day.
And the commenters were so into it. People kept mentioning the cello soundtrack, and pretty much everyone agreed it felt like a real labor of love.
So yeah, aside from a little nerdy pedantry about units and blue whale factoids, I think the takeaway is pretty clear. If you see a Neil.fun link, you just click.
Our next story is donating the Model Context Protocol and establishing the Agentic AI Foundation, which hit 277 points and 126 comments on Hacker News. It actually peaked yesterday around number 9 before drifting back to number 15, and there were at least 2 other front-page posts about the same move, so the real interest was way higher than it looks from this one thread.
Yeah, and the article itself is Anthropic announcing they're donating MCP, the Model Context Protocol, to a new Agentic AI Foundation under the Linux Foundation. It's co-founded with Block and OpenAI and backed by the usual cloud giants. They highlight more than 10,000 active public MCP servers and 97 million SDK downloads a month, plus adoption in ChatGPT, Gemini, Copilot, VS Code, and so on.
If you haven't followed MCP, think of it as a standard way for AI models to talk to tools and services. And the Agentic AI Foundation is basically a neutral home for multiple of these building blocks. MCP from Anthropic, Goose from Block, and Agents.md from OpenAI.
The top HN comment is not exactly buying the hype. They say it feels far too early to drop a 1-year-old, still turbulent protocol into a Linux Foundation sub-foundation, and they worry this just leads to certified MCP developer type revenue schemes before the tech is actually stable.
Someone pushes back that MCP's adoption has been 10x faster than Kubernetes, so if you use that yardstick, donating it early to get vendor neutrality so that big companies can fully commit actually makes sense. Another commenter snipes that comparing Kubernetes to a subdirectory of shell scripts and their man pages is brave.
A huge chunk of the thread rehashes the original MCP dilemma. Why do we need MCP at all? Couldn't we just use REST, OpenAPI, or Swagger specs? One person says MCP feels like a lot of work to serve a JSON file with a URL. Another calls the whole thing a land grab and not much else. So there's definitely that protocol fatigue vibe.
But then people who've actually built MCP servers show up with war stories. There's the Jira example. You type, produce release notes for version 1.2.3, or export all tickets with worklog to CSV, and suddenly the AI is orchestrating Jira for you. You don't need a bespoke export feature at all. Another commenter calls MCP a chatbot app store standard, solving the bring your own tools to an existing chatbot problem.
Another commenter points out the foundation name, Agentic AI Foundation, not MCP Foundation, as a hedge in case MCP isn't the long-term winner.
Maybe the most honest take was the one that said, MCP's value lies in the social alignment. Its technical merits seem dubious while its community merits seem high. And that's kind of where this donation lands. If enough big players agree to meet here, it might not matter whether it's the perfect protocol, only that it's the shared one. All right, next up is Transformers Know More Than They Can Tell, which hit around position 35 with 126 points and 44 comments on HN. Not a high ranking, but our human editor is big into LLM architecture and finds these kinds of posts interesting.
Yeah, this one's fun. It's about taking a tiny transformer, teaching it this weird little number game called the Collatz sequence, and then really dissecting what algorithm the model actually learned under the hood.
So a quick explain it like I'm five sidebar on the Collatz sequence, because someone literally asked for that on HN. You start from any positive integer. If it's even, you divide by 2. If it's odd, you do 3n plus 1 and then divide by 2. Then you keep repeating that. And the big unsolved conjecture is, no matter what number you start from, you always end up at 1.
And the paper doesn't just look at a single tiny step. It looks at what they call a long Collatz step, where you basically jump over a bunch of those up-down moves in one go. So it becomes this more complex function with actual loops and control flow baked in.
What I really liked is they start messing with how the integers are encoded. They change the number base. And performance just swings all over the place. One commenter summed it up. Bases 8, 12, 16, 24, 32 all hit like 99.7% accuracy, while base 3 is down around 25%.
Right. And the authors say the models learn in a sequence of classes of inputs that share the same residual modulo 2 to the p, which in normal person English is basically they learn certain binary patterns first, like particular remainder classes, and only later pick up the others.
Their punchline is that the transformer almost always does the arithmetic correctly, but it misestimates how long the loops should run. So instead of just spitting out random nonsense, as they put it fails in principled ways instead of hallucinating.
On HN, people were kind of hung up on the title. One top comment was like, okay, but what exactly do these models know but can't tell? And another person pointed out it's probably riffing on that other paper, language models mostly know what they know.
The author actually showed up in the thread and basically said, look, the real focus is Collatz and interpretability, watching the model learn one loop at a time. And that whole base conversion is hard thing was more of a side quest they didn't chase because page limits.
Which, of course, immediately triggered the least publishable unit debate. Someone quipped, why release one paper when you can release 2? And others started talking about how citation metrics push you to slice the work as thinly as possible.
And then there was that very strong pushback on the 99.7% number. Jacques M. had this line, a pocket calculator that would give the right numbers 99.7% of the time would be fairly useless.
And a bunch of replies jumped in saying that's a category error, because we don't have a closed-form solution to Collatz, right? So this isn't meant to be your trusty calculator. It's more like a fast heuristic, or a pattern finder, not a drop-in replacement for the exact algorithm.
Another commenter pointed out that a model like this might actually surface new structure, like those binary classes that correlate with Collatz behavior. even if you'd never, ever trust it as your only calculator.
I also think there's a nice meta lesson here. If the choice of base representation and the way loops are structured can swing performance that much, then just throw more data at a transformer really isn't a universal strategy for doing math.
Yeah, and the interpretability angle here feels pretty hopeful to me. Using gnarly but well-defined problems like Collatz as microscopes for what these models are actually doing, instead of just obsessing over who's on top of the leaderboard this week. Next up is a Reuters piece. Rubio stages font coup, Times New Roman ousts Calibri, which hit number 6 on Hacker News with 238 points and around 385 comments.
Yeah, so Secretary of State Marco Rubio told the State Department to dump Calibri and go back to Times New Roman, called Blinken's 2023 switch a wasteful diversity move. Blinken had adopted Calibri because sans serif fonts are supposed to be more accessible for people with low vision.
For anyone not living in font land, serif fonts like Times have little feet on the letters, and sans serif like Calibri are just cleaner shapes. The idea was accessibility versus decorum and professionalism, as Rubio's cable put it.
The top comment is a flex. Somebody from Lucas Fonts, the studio that designed Calibri, shows up in the thread. He calls the decision amusing and regrettable, and explains Calibri was engineered for screens, while Times was originally crafted for newspaper printing and tends to look too thin and sharp in its common digital form.
He even dunks on Times' spacing in all-caps words like Chicago, where hic is all crushed together and cag is way too loose, and basically says that using default digital Times isn't considered professional typography. Hacker News absolutely ate that up.
Then the thread just pivots hard into politics. One commenter says what Rubio really wants is to smear anything the previous administration did as DEIA waste. And another points out that if switching to Calibri was pointless, changing it a second time is the exact same thing.
The accessibility crowd comes in strong, too. My favorite line was, "You sound like someone saying we shouldn't have ramps and elevators because crutches exist," which was a response to, "They already have tools for visually impaired readers."
And of course, we get the comic relief. Comic Sans reflects the current US government best, both spiritually and aesthetically. Plus, people lobbying for wingdings as the official diplomatic font. Hacker News stays extremely on brand.
The purest font nerd moment, though, is someone telling everyone to go watch that 2017 SNL sketch with Ryan Gosling obsessing over Avatar using the papyrus font. A bunch of commenters linked both the original and the sequel. Our human editor apparently laughed out loud and absolutely loved it.
But the underlying point is real. This isn't just about Times versus Calibri. It's about using tiny visual choices as culture war trophies, with people who need accessible text stuck in the middle.